Welcome to Stories After Midnight. Today we're going to be reading 3 years ago, I was a research student working on a remote island. We were out of lab rats, so our professor used us instead. This series seems about 3 parts long, and it's written by Trash Dia. And a huge shout out before we get started to my patrons for helping make this episode possible. Let's get started. I can't believe I finally got the guts to post this to social media. After 3 years, I'm finally ready to tell our story. I know I shouldn't. This is a huge risk, and I'm putting both myself and my friends in danger of being caught by some pretty bad people who are currently hunting us down. My life as I knew it ended in 2020. I would talk about how ironic it was that it had to be 2020, but I don't have time to ramble. I was volunteering as a lab assistant for a college professor I was close to. After graduating at the top of my class, I had been offered the opportunity to assist him overseas as a voluntary research assistant. I should have been working in his usual lab at the college, but due to certain ethical issues he didn't want to deal with on campus, he decided to fly his most promising students to his primary lab on a tiny Indonesian island. He took on 6 of us. The top of his class, as well as students who seemed far too interested in what he was really working on. Normally, college professors would discourage curiosity when it came to their private lives and work, but he welcomed it, allowing certain students glimpses into the research he was working on under his facade. I can't say I wasn't curious about the paperwork I happened to glimpse. Paperwork covered in special plastic seals brandishing top secret in bold lettering, which was definitely intriguing. Sure, I wanted to know what was so special about his research that it warranted that kind of seal. But it's not like I broke into his lab unlike my colleagues. You would think biology students would be smart, but those idiots didn't stand a chance with the amount of security our college had. I thought that would be a surefire suspension, and it almost was, until the professor himself had pardoned them before inviting the group alongside me to work with him on this secret project. I know I sound crazy for taking a voluntary job, but the job was on a tiny island just off of the coast of Indonesia, which meant I was working in paradise. It was like being on a permanent vacation. We had the beach at our disposal, and the local resort was just a walk away. After sweating in the lab on weekdays, we headed to the private pool down the road. Professor Quincy was a well-known local, so he had managed to get us free entry. I guess you could say I was living the dream. 3 years prior, I was in my freshman year of college, and I had no idea what I was doing with my life. Fast forward 2 years, and I had the opportunity of a lifetime. I was working in literal paradise. It didn't last long, of course. I had to wake up from my dream at some point, right? And I did. March 2020. I can't remember which date it was. I just remember that it was right at the start of the pandemic, and I was supposed to be going home to see family I hadn't seen in almost 6 months. Professor Quincy had been insistent we live and work with him for a certain amount of time, and then he would grant us permission to return home to see our family. I couldn't exactly argue it. Like I said, and I will continue to elaborate through this post, our professor's work was pretty private. Cell phones were not allowed, and internet access was limited. If I needed to phone home, I had to sign 7 different forms to promise I wouldn't leak any information on his work, and to declare that if I happened to do so, I would be fired immediately and sent back to the US. If that wasn't enough, my parents would also be held accountable. So yeah, obviously I wasn't going to start spilling our professor's secrets. It's not like we were completely cut off. There was a phone in Professor Quincy's office as well as the reception at the dorms. We were allowed 3 allocated phone calls a week. After a certain world event had unfolded, however, we were allowed to call our parents pretty much any time we wanted, as long as we signed those release forms. After a full day of nonstop paranoia and too much time skimming news articles on my laptop, I was itching to talk to Mom. I just didn't know how to tell her that I wouldn't be seeing her well, I had no idea. The US borders were shutting, and I was at a loss what to do. If I'm to be honest with you, I was terrified. This kind of thing only happened in movies, and there I was, trying to figure out a way to tell my mom I wouldn't be coming home. And I had no idea if I would ever be coming home again. The dorms were state-of-the-art, a huge glass building with 3 floors. There was a gym, a swimming pool, and a girls' and boys' dorm on the top levels. There were only 6 of us, so it was pretty damn amazing. Sometimes in the summer when it was baking hot, like the kind of heat the human body can't deal with, they opened the roof, and we would all lie in the reception area, drunk on cocktails from the resort. But do you know what wasn't state-of-the-art? The aircon. I had grown accustomed to this stupid thing breaking every 3 days. Normally, I didn't really care. I'd get a cold shower or stick my head in the freezer. That day, though, I had just been informed via email I wouldn't be returning home for the foreseeable future. The thing was, I was so used to knowing things in advance. I knew when work was canceled or when I was getting sick. Though with this, I had no idea what the outcome would be. Nobody did. The planet was holding a collective breath. I couldn't even ask for a possible date, because no one knew how this huge, insane, life-changing thing would play out. Well, it could play out either one way or the other, and I had seen the movies. I knew the basics, or at least the fictional reenactments. So, sweating through baking heat, I sat cross-legged on prickly carpet, squeezing the phone in my palmy hands. I could glimpse Kion through the window, slumped on a sun lounger with his head tipped back. He was frowning at an odd-looking bird which was perched on the upper deck. It was early evening, and the sun was starting to set. God, I loved watching the sunset. It was like the clouds had turned into cotton candy, streaks of burning red and pink enveloping crystal blue and dimming the sky, making it easier to get a good look at the sun. Kion's light brown hair exploded into hues of vivid red, and I was momentarily taken aback by the sight, like the sky had set his hair on fire. Ever since meeting him in my freshman year, I'd had a crush on Kion. Being half Thai with striking features and a Hollywood smile, my ass was already on the floor. However, after living with him for several months and studying alongside him for years, I'd come to realize he was more of a wolf in sheep's clothing. Not exactly a dick, but not the nicest either. Kion was deaf and had become the sort of jock of our little research group. He had been the one to stage the break-in attempt into Professor Quincy's lab. I always wondered if they really had discovered something and blackmailed Quincy into letting them in on the research. I wouldn't put it past my classmates. They were as nutty as our professor. I was half wishing Mom didn't answer, then I would have no choice but to tell her through email, which was better. Still, though, I wanted to hear her voice, even if it was going to send me over the edge. When my mom's voice crackled through the phone, I panicked and said the first thing which came to mind. I'm staying here for a little longer, I said. I was told this morning I can't come home. Mom was silent for a moment before she sighed. Yeah. I was surprised when she chuckled. I figured that, sweetie. You're not mad? I whispered. She didn't reply for a moment before sighing. Why would I be mad? It's not like you can help it. Squeezing the phone tighter, I turned away so Kion couldn't see me sobbing like an idiot. It's not for long, I said, or rather lied. I wasn't just trying to reassure my mother. I was desperate to make myself feel better too. I think it'll be late April or maybe May. I'm not sure yet. Well, I'm excited to see you. Nodding, I swallowed a racking sob. I'm excited to see you too, Mom. Are you eating well? Oh, yeah. The food here is great. How was work? She was avoiding elaborating on a conversation neither of us wanted to have, and I didn't blame her. It's fine, I said. We've been working in some pretty intense heat, but I'm fine. I just cool off in the sea. That's good. I could sense my mother's smile, and it made me feel 10 times worse. How are things over there? Mom hummed. There's no toilet paper, she laughed. But we're all fine. Your little brother is baking cookies. Do you want to talk to him? No, I said far too fast. I mean, I don't have much time, and I wanted to talk to you. I swallowed. If that's okay. Of course, honey. Mom's voice felt like warm water coming over me, relieving my stiff muscles. Oh, your father just finished cleaning your room out the other day. You would not believe how much stuff we had to take to your yard sale. Do you remember that dollhouse you had? She cut me off. Well, I've given it to Mrs. Jason's daughter. Do you remember Lucy? Lucy, I said, my mind elsewhere. She was that kid, you held her at your Auntie Christine's birthday party. Do you remember? She's always asking about you. She thinks you're a marine biologist. Oh, I said helplessly. Sensing movement, I twisted around to find Kion heading up the stairs, probably to his room. Usually, Monday nights were reserved for the beach. After lights out, We headed down to the coves, which were a 3-minute walk from the dorms, to paddle in bioluminescent plankton illuminating the stuffy night. It was like dipping your feet in liquid stars. From the look on my colleague's face, however, a sort of not entirely there frown, I doubted anyone was in the mood for our usual trip to the beach. Offering the boy a wave, I pulled my knees to my chest. I didn't realize I'd left an awkward pause until Mom cleared her throat loudly, snapping me out of my trance. "Ren, did you hear what I said?" "Ren?" Mom only had to say my name to send my heart into my throat. "Honey, are you crying?" I had to heave in a breath. "No." "You're watching the news, aren't you?" "Mom, I'm fine." "Are you sure?" Mom paused. "Ren, I can't imagine what you must be feeling right now, but I'm just a phone call away." I nodded, my eyes burning. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, baby." Mom's voice hitched and she was splintering. I could tell by her sharp breaths. "I'll see you soon, okay?" That was the last time I ever spoke to my mother. The sky was dark when I pulled open the door to my shared room and face-planted into my bed. Long after putting the phone down, I sat in the reception area and cried like an idiot. Then I went outside to attempt to read a book on a sun lounger, but with the lack of sun and the fact that the outdoor light was broken, I gave up and retreated upstairs. Riss, my roommate, was typing loudly on her laptop when I bothered lifting my head from my snot-drenched pillow. She had been taking the news surprisingly well, despite her being the one in our group who was over-emotional. Riss was a natural redhead but had dyed her hair an odd pastel pink color, which was starting to come out. I could see her natural vivid red roots springing from her half-assed ponytail. "How's your mom?" Riss didn't look up from her laptop, her fingers dancing across the keyboard. I glimpsed the Word doc she had been working on earlier in the lab. We were supposed to type up all the findings from the day's experiments earlier, and as usual, Riss was the last to submit hers. She was the lazy daydreamer out of our group, often getting chastised for zoning out during lectures and falling asleep. Riss was smart, though. Seriously smart. When she felt like it. "Hello?" Riss slammed the spacebar. "How was the talk with your mom?" "It was fine." "Doesn't sound like it," Riss hummed. "Come on, I know when you're upset. Damn." She hissed through her teeth, going to town on the backspace key. "Stupid autocorrect." I didn't reply for a moment, suffocating myself in my pillow. The aircon was broken again, so I was left to suffer, stewing in the same clothes I had been wearing all day. I needed a cold shower and something from the downstairs kitchen, but I couldn't be bothered moving. Besides, Riss's typing was comforting, lulling me into almost slumber. After a while of just basking in the sound of her typing, my roommate sighed loudly. I sensed her jump up from her bed and move to her desk. My roommate had a routine I was used to. After typing up her usually late reports, she jumped up, did some stretches, downed the bottle of water on her desk, and then jumped up and down with too much energy, awaiting the printout. Just as I thought, I cringed at the sound of our printer booting up. I hated the noise. It sounded like nails on a chalkboard. "It's the end of the world as we know it," Riss murmured with another loud, exaggerated sigh, "and we're stuck in paradise." Refusing to lift my head from my pillow despite the heat, I scoffed into the material. "Stop saying that." "Stop saying what?" "That it's the end of the world." "I mean, it is. Certain events aside, have you seen the state of the ozone layer? Dude, we're on a one-way ticket to extinction." I really didn't need Riss's comforting talks right then. Her idea of reassuring was reminding me how many species were dying out. "Uh-huh," I said, cutting into her slightly manic polar bear rant. "Can we talk about something else?" "But it's true," Riss chuckled. "The world is falling apart, and we're here trying to do the impossible." She paused. "In one of the most beautiful places on the planet." When I lifted my head to frown at her, my roommate was sprawled out on her bed, her 10-page report awkwardly balanced on her chest. Riss's eyes were elsewhere. Riss's eyes were somewhere else, delving into oblivion. I couldn't tell what she was feeling. She was smiling, but her eyes were sad. It had taken me a while, but eventually, after weeks and then months had gone by, I'd gotten used to Professor Quincy's research. It was hard to take in at first, like you have this huge secret and you can't tell anyone. If you do, you're risking your own career. I imagined it as a neutron star collision going off in my head. An explosion of colors nobody else could see but us. Locked away on this tiny island, we were the only ones who knew Quincy's goal. There was one rule to the lab. No emotions. We weren't allowed to have emotions once stepping through the door. We had to stop being human for the sake of achieving successes, and moving on to a different age. A better age. That's what Quincy said anyway. I wondered if Riss was thinking about the work we did earlier. She had broken down 3 times since starting, though she was getting better. Riss didn't speak much after an awkward conversation we had about the end of the world, which bled into a conversation about The Walking Dead. It fizzled out after I reminded her I was yet to finish it after dumping it halfway through Season 4. There's not much to do in the dorm. I had my laptop and several dozen movies downloaded onto it, but I wasn't in the mood to delve into fiction. I was falling asleep when our door flew open and Riss almost catapulted her laptop across the room. My gaze flicked to the doorway where Kion stood, a scowl carved into his lips. It wasn't unusual that my colleague was scowling or standing in our doorway. He was always the first one up on a morning, quick to wake everyone else up despite the sun not being up yet. "Kion?" Riss hissed, her eyes glued to our damp-looking colleague. "What the hell?" Looking at him, I could tell that Kion wasn't there willingly. His hair was a soaking mess plastered to his forehead, a plaid shirt clumsily buttoned over ratty shorts. He looked like he'd just gotten out of the shower. But no, he didn't just look like it. I was sure Kion had just gotten out of the shower. When he held up one hand and started to furiously sign, the jingling noise brought my attention to the cuff attached to his left wrist. "Jem?" He signed his roommate's name, and I resisted the urge to collapse back into bed. Nothing was good when Jem was involved. I loved my colleague, but the amount of stupid crap he had done since starting work on the island, he could make his own sitcom. Riss groaned, shutting her laptop. She quickly signed. "What has he done now?" Kion's expression twisted with fury. "What hasn't he done?" He held up his wrist, signing maniacally. "He cuffed me to my bed." Kinky. I shot him a smile, and seeing his expression, I quickly regretted my words when his gaze flashed to a stuffed animal on the floor. I had no doubt he wanted to aim for my face. "What? Why did he cuff you to your bed?" Riss was already pulling on her jacket. I jumped up too, slipping into my sandals. "Rabbits," was all Kion had to sign with wide eyes, before we were following him back down the dorm hallway and down the stairs. I was practically falling over myself to keep up. Kion ran in front, Riss stumbling behind him. If Jem was in the lab after hours, it wasn't good. Ever since we made the switch from rats to rabbits, Jem had been very vocal that he was against it. But, like Quincy said, we had to give up our humanity in that room, our morals. Anything we thought, our opinions and emotions, we had to suppress it all. Because once we started to give in to them, our professor had proclaimed that was when cracks would start to form. According to him, the first step in turning your back on science was giving into your humanity. I wasn't quite there yet. It's not like I didn't have intrusive thoughts about saving the poor things, but Quincy had planted a very specific thought in our heads. If we rebelled, if we leaked information and went against him, our families were at risk of getting involved, despite having nothing to do with it. Jem had already submitted multiple complaints, and I didn't blame him, but it's not like we could all band together to stop Quincy's experiments. Like I said, we were walking on eggshells around him, and he was already a fairly paranoid man. And morals and humanity aside, his work was pretty damn incredible. Disgusting and inhumane? Yes, of course, but truly incredible. The lab was a 5-minute walk from the dorms. Riss was out of breath as we ran across the shore, and I glimpsed a full moon light up the darkening sky, illuminating oblivion in milky white light. "What I don't understand," she panted, "is why I cuff you to your bed." She turned to Kion, who signed. "He knew I was going to tell someone when I got out of the shower. He grabbed me and cuffed me to the frame." The boy scowled. "I'm going to kill him." By the time the 3 of us were throwing ourselves through the doors of the lab, pressing our identity badges over the mechanical lock, I was sweating. Bad. I think all 3 of us wanted to collectively murder our colleague. The lab was usually out of bounds after work hours, but sometimes Professor Quincy made exceptions if we needed to finish reports or collect data. Riss was stabbing in the 8-digit code to get into Quincy's office, and I was struggling to catch my breath, keeled over with my hands on my knees. The building was usually lit up, even at night. I'd spend countless after-work hours typing up research reports and listening to music, comforted by the warm glow from the lights overhead. But that wasn't the case on that particular night. A coil of dread began to unravel in my gut as we bound down the main hallway, which was swamped in darkness. Riss made a joke about failed experiments lurking around us, and I elbowed her sharply in the gut. Thankfully, Quincy's main lab was lit up. When the doors swung open with a loud beep, the three of us bound straight into a startled-looking Jem, whose expression almost matched the ones of the dozen baby rabbits cradled to his chest. If Cayenne resembled a Hollywood star, then this guy reminded me more of a punk kid. Maybe a theater kid, too. Jem was the wild card in our group. He wasn't the smartest, and he struggled sometimes. But Quincy had admired the boy's curiosity in his research. Jem's hair was always a mess of disheveled curls, and his outfit choices were odd. For example, Jem had opted for wearing pajamas to his rabbit heist. It was almost like he had an epiphany in his sleep, and hurricane thoughts had led him right into the lab. For a moment, I was unsure whether to laugh or start yelling at him. Jem peeked at us under his hood, his eyes almost cartoonishly wide, like he was a kid being caught stealing cookies from the cookie jar. The subjects he was holding seemed to cling onto him, and I had a moment, just a moment, where I cracked slightly, especially when the largest one's tiny eyes found mine. It was frightened, its claws digging into his sleeve. "I can explain," Jem finally spluttered, pressing the rabbits closer to his chest. "This is animal abuse," he said in a hiss. "You're not really going to stand there and watch that bastard hurt these little guys, are you?" I was sure Jem was convinced he could get away with it by showing us the power of cuteness. I can't say it wasn't working. God, the one in the middle with large floppy ears and a brown smudge on its fur was really looking at me, like it was staring into my soul. Next to me, Kion's expression was easing a little. He leaned against the door with his arms folded. "They're kind of cute," he sighed, smiling for the first time since that morning when Riss spilled orange juice all over herself. "See?" Jem's smile was soft, and he gestured to them. "Look at them. They're adorable. I'm not going to let him hurt them." Riss, however, seemed unfazed. She took a step towards him, her eyes darkening. "Are you insane?" she gritted out. "So what? You want to let Quincy's test subjects go?" Jem's lip curled. "He's got rats. I'm sure he'll be fine." He backed away, clutching the rabbits tighter to his chest. "You've seen what he's done to them," he whispered, and his gaze flicked to me and then to Kion. "What we have done to them. It's not fair. They're living creatures and we're hurting them." This was what I was afraid of. Ever since the six of us started on the island and Quincy's lecture on suppressing our humanity for the sake of science, I knew one of us was going to break when we saw what exactly he was doing to his subjects. I'm not going to go into detail because, again, I'm already putting myself at risk by writing this. But I will say that Quincy's experiments weren't normal. I've already told you that they were inhumane and immoral. But it didn't end there. You see, our professor was positive that he could ignite a certain part of the human brain with simple stimulation, a hell of a lot of drugs and psychological tactics. He believed he could find that missing part that is missing in all of us, which stops us from being the apex predator. Abilities way beyond our comprehension. Professor Quincy had been working his whole life to create a serum which would hack into the mind and switch on that part of us we cannot find on our own. Rats didn't give him the right results, so we moved on to rabbits. So far, I had witnessed a rabbit which could teleport from one cage to the other. After several surgeries, serum injections directly into its brain. Impossible. I thought it was impossible, and yet somehow I was watching it with my own eyes. A living thing disappearing in one place and reappearing in its cage. Through research, we had come to realize the cage was the rabbit's safe place. Whatever ability it had, and there were many, it would always return to its cage, no matter where we placed them. The serum wasn't perfect, however. I had witnessed a rabbit interfere with the electronics in the lab, playing with the lights, before exploding into large, fleshy chunks painting the metal prongs of its cage a startling, gory red. The rabbits in Jem's arms were our only proof that the serum worked. They were our last surviving 4, subjects 2, 6, 10, and 15. I have to admit, subject 15 freaked me out. 15's ability was not yet known, but Kion was sure that it was developing heightened intelligence. I didn't know much about 15, but from what I did know, there was no damn way we could let Jem let the little guy run free. Knowing what they were capable of, and what we could possibly lose if my colleague got his own way, snapped me out of my, "Ah, they're so cute," trance. I stepped forward, cringing when I glimpsed remnants of the metal headset which had been drilled into Six's skull. "Give them here," I said, and when Jem started to shake his head, I snapped. "Do you want to get fired?" He wasn't letting up. "They're living things, Ren!" I nodded, trying to keep my cool. "They are," I said, "but they're also valuable subjects, one of which can teleport. I wouldn't exactly say they're normal rabbits." I held my breath. "Look," I gave up acting like I knew what the hell I was talking about. "I don't like it either, okay? It's disgusting and immoral, and findings and psychokinetic abilities aside, I would be totally on your side if we didn't have results. But we do have results." Kion signed. He seemed to have snapped out of it too. "Give them back, Jem. They're research subjects." "They're rabbits! Have you guys lost your minds?" "Yes," Kion signed. "It's part of the job description, douche." "You have a dog," Jem shot back in a manic hiss. His expression was feral. I'd never seen that kind of desperation. Almost unbridled lucidity let loose. "It's no different to your dog, right? Would you seriously put him through this? Would you stick a needle inside his skull?" Kion didn't reply, his jaw clenching. "No, you wouldn't. So why these guys, huh? Why are you willing to be so cruel for the sake of science for these guys? But you wouldn't dream of doing this to your pet." Jem took another shaky step back, so I figured hitting him with the hard truth would snap him out of it. "It's not the same." Kion seemed to be struggling with his hands trembling as he signed. It's different." "What's different?" Jem demanded. "There's no difference. If it were a rat, I would feel the same way. We're hurting living animals." "Your dad," I said quickly. "Do you want to drag him into this?" Again, Kion started to sign, Riss elbowing him to shut up. It was no secret Jem and his father had been under fire back home after discovering a document he shouldn't have. All he did was read it, according to the boy himself. He had the men in black trying to crash through his door at 4 a.m. Jem was lucky Professor Quincy decided to use his curiosity as a tool instead of sending his family to jail. Jem blinked like he was waking from a trance. "No," he said quickly, his resolve crumbling. My colleague allowed Kion and Riss to take the subjects and put them back in their cages. I expected him to fight back, but the guy seemed weirdly fine with us taking the rabbits back, stumbling away from them like they were contagious. With all subjects accounted for, we headed back to the dorms and ate dinner, and I remember running my hands through Jem's hair, a little bit drunk on cocktails, and promising him that once Professor Quincy was finished with his research, he would let the rabbits go. I wasn't completely sure of this myself, and it was just a friendly lie to make him feel better, considering he'd been acting weird all night. I'd been lazily sipping water to sober myself up when the thought hit me. It didn't really make an impact, more of a passing thought. Did Subject 15 have any influence over Jem's mind? 15 had already proved it could type in a single sentence on a keyboard, and tap on a tablet screen to identify certain fruits. Was it possible that it had developed the ability to influence the brain? I wasn't sure I wanted an answer to that. Anyway, we all headed to bed, and I made sure Jem promised he wouldn't do something like that again. I still remember the way he looked at me, slightly confused, mouth open like he had no idea what I was talking about. I figured he was just tipsy, and after frowning at me for way longer than necessary, Jem saluted me with a, "Yeah, of course I promise." Yeah, that promise lasted maybe 6 damn hours. I was spooning dry cereal in my mouth the next morning, trying to ignore the news bulletin on the TV, when we got the first call. Jem had broken into the lab 2 hours ago and let the subjects run free. By the time I'd thrown myself into the lab, barely dressed, the others were already getting screamed at. And I mean screamed at by Quincy. I glimpsed my colleagues through the glass window as I threw myself into a run towards the lab. It looked like they had been dragged out of bed. Riss was in her robe, Kion and Jem half-dressed. The three were sitting in the communal area looking like they wanted to sink into the earth, while Quincy's voice reverberated back down the hallway. When I stepped through the automatic doors, our professor turned to me, his expression thunderous. "Ren?" He passive-aggressively gestured to the others. "Why don't you take a seat, His British accent was easy to tolerate, usually. But that morning he sounded like a Bond villain. I nodded and practically dived next to Riss, who looked like she was 10 seconds from wrapping her hands around Jem's neck. Kion was glaring at his lap, ignoring the professor's ASL, and Jem looked kind of confused. "You're late." Quincy turned his piercing gaze to me. "I'm 5 minutes early, Professor Quincy," I said, glancing at the clock to make sure I was right. The man didn't respond, turning back to Jem. "As I was saying, I was just letting your colleague know that he has thrown quite a wrench in our plans. But no matter, we can fix this." He cleared his throat. "Mr. Sayung?" Professor Quincy nodded to Kion. "There are several research subjects in storage that I have been saving for these kinds of emergencies," he said. "Please retrieve them so we can continue working on this project. And hurry up." Kion paled. For a moment I thought he was going to barf. "Professor Quincy," he started to sign, before pausing. "You ordered me to dispose of them 2 weeks ago." He shot me a look, and I remembered the two of us loading a cage full of rats into a truck. "We don't have them." The professor's expression contorted, and he smiled. He smiled, like he thought it was funny. "Right," he said in a breath. "You're telling me." He lifted his arm like he was going to strike each of us, and I sensed the four of us collectively wince. "You're all telling me, all four of you, that our current research subjects are nowhere to be seen? Our backup subjects have been disposed of, and I'm supposed to be doing a presentation next week?" His voice cracked. "Next week?" he repeated, beginning to pace, and I was starting to regret choosing my curiosity over my well-being. Sure, psychokinetic abilities are cool, right? Cracking open the human brain and discovering something magical, something out of this world, was a dream come true. We were witnessing history being made, what could fundamentally change the world. But I was sitting inside a lab with a man who was clearly unhinged, thousands of miles from home and no guarantee I would ever return home. A shiver slid down my spine when our professor stopped pacing up and down, and something seemed to light up his eyes. I saw it. Something in his brain snapped. It was like seeing a real-life light bulb moment. "We're okay," he said after a moment of silence. Quincy seemed to gather himself. "You're dismissed. I will get my hands on new research subjects. Do not worry about that." His smile was far too big, and I nodded, relieved, and jumped to my feet, eager to make a quick getaway. Jem stood up, grabbing his bag. "Will we have time?" he asked. "I mean, the presentation is next week and we need to start over." "That's right." His wrist was frowning. "Professor, where exactly are you going to get new test subjects? Didn't the college stop funding the project?" "Oh, ha, I have subjects," he chuckled. "I have always had subjects, don't worry. They've always been my last resort." I nodded. "So, do you have spare rats?" "Makes sense," Kion sighed. "I bet he has a secret batch somewhere." "Precisely, Kion," Professor Quincy nodded, a wide smile splitting his lips apart. "So, rats?" I pressed. He was still yet to answer my question, and I was growing anxious of what these subjects were. It must have been rats. It must have been rabbits, surely. Rabbits were our best shot at getting results. Rats worked well, I guessed, but not as good as rabbits. He caught my eye, and something cold slipped down my spine when the man's grin didn't waver. "You could say they're rats." He seemed to be drinking me in, his gaze flicking up and down from my head to my toes. "Don't worry. They will be ready for the presentation. I will make sure." "Well, that's great." Jem's expression brightened. "So we didn't have to use the rabbits after all, huh? Who would have thought?" To my surprise, the professor was in unusually high spirits. After a lecture repeating his insistence that we had to suppress our humanity for the sake of science, which was mostly aimed at Jem, he flocked to his desk, sorting through paperwork and leaving the room several times to take part in phone calls. He must have really been pushing to get a new living materials. I noticed his hands were quivering. Was it fear? Excitement? Without a word, Quincy left the lab with an armful of paperwork. When Riss asked what we were supposed to do, he told us to stay exactly where we were, while he retrieved new research materials. Great. With the professor gone, it didn't take long before Riss was trying to strangle Jem, acting like it was playful, but the look in her eyes definitely had a more nefarious intent. Kion, being the smartass of our group, was already sorting through our day's work, as if we hadn't just lost our subjects. The lab was pretty much our playground. The professor's words, not mine. But there was a specific room which was out of bounds. Quincy called it the fail room, where all of his failed experiments were, living or dead, or preserved in some weird solution. The exact reason I was convinced he was unhinged was in that room. I didn't realize it was unlocked until a crashing sound sent me jumping up from my chair, my heart catapulting into my throat. Jem and Riss looked up from their work, and I noticed Kion's seat was empty. That sounded ominous. Jem shot me a look. Did he? He didn't, I muttered, my gaze flicking to the other side of the room where, to my surprise, the room which had always been out of bounds was in fact open. Before I could hesitate or think of the consequences, I hurried to the door, coming to a grinding halt on the threshold. I was aware of my colleague's shadows, several feet away from me. I was aware of the petrified look of fright carved into his face, and his eyes wide, like he was staring into oblivion, like the darkness had already taken him. Instead of finding Kion, I was seeing what I can only describe as several lumps piled on top of each other. When I got closer, forcing my feet into submission, those lumps bled into very human-like figures wrapped in see-through plastic. For a disorienting second, while my head spun around and around, a slithery paste crawling up my throat, I saw them as nothing but lumps of naked flesh bulging through plastic. But then I was recognizing faces. Faces I knew. Faces which had been mutilated, stained a startling scarlet like they had been dipped in the reddest paint available. I knew the first lump. Sarah. She went home 2 weeks earlier, due to illness. The following fleshy lump with its face ripped off, which I could no longer call human, was Thomas. He too went home for a family emergency and never came back. Quincy said they had both requested to leave. He said they would miss us, but it was too much. Seeing what we were doing was too much for them. They couldn't suppress their emotions. Sarah and Thomas had never left. They never went home. They were right there in front of me, reduced to chunks of flesh and bodily organs. There was a white strip of paper attached to both of them, a single word written in bold lettering. Fail. That word sent my stomach heaving, my feet stumbling back and my body erupting into fight or flight. Kion twisted around, his face illuminated in dim light flickering from a bulb above. Out, he signed, and it was the desperation in his eyes, the heaving breaths struggling from his lips, which got me moving. I was pressing my hand over my mouth, muffling a sharp scream ripping from my throat, when Kion grabbed my arm and dragged me back. I was barely conscious of getting out of that room before the alarm started, sending me to my knees. What the hell is that? Riz was next to me, her voice shrill. Jem had one hand planted over his ear, his arm wrapped around a hysterical Kion. Ren, what is it? What's in there? I couldn't reply. Instead of trying to speak or explain, I grabbed Riz and dragged her to the door. Kion and Jem were already on the hallway, and I was barely slipping back through the automatic doors before they slammed shut, and a familiar voice crackled over the speakers. Stay where you are, Professor Quincy said. We will be returning to work very soon. By the grace of God, I have found subjects. Us. My blood ran ice cold in my veins. He was talking about us. What the hell? Jem yelled. What are you talking about? I didn't think. I just ran, and sprinting down that hallway which was familiar, which had always felt like a second home to me, I had no idea it would become my prison. It would become the very hallway I would wish to die on. The hallway I would be dragged down, day after day, while my mind was picked apart. Ahead of us, the doors were shutting, red lights bathing our faces. I remember how scared they were. Jem, who reached the exit doors, slamming his fists into the glass. Riss, trying to override the mechanical lock. Kion, who had given up, dropped onto his knees and pulled him to his chest. When gas filled the air, I was still trying to get through the door. Riss had forced Kion to his feet, and Jem was trying to find any weapon in his vicinity. But there were no weapons. There was just the four of us against a gas which was quickly disorienting us. When black spots started to dance across my vision, and Jem's eyes rolled to the back of his head, his body dropping to the floor, I was thinking about Subject 15. I was thinking about its beady eyes when I bit my lip and drilled into its tiny skull under my professor's gaze. Riss dropped next, then Kion. I was quickly losing consciousness, my clammy head pressed against glass, clawing at the lock, when the thought hit me. We deserved it. For what we had done to those rabbits, playing God and trying to turn them into something they weren't, we deserved it. Whatever my professor was planning to do to us, I had an inkling it would be far worse than what the rabbits had endured. We were going to suffer, I thought dizzily. For science. And I can tell you, 3 years later, as I currently share a hotel room with 3 murderers, my past self was more than right. And that's the end of this part. I really hope you enjoyed it. If you do, let me know in the comments, wherever you are. Let me know if you're excited for part 2 and 3. A huge shout out to my patrons once again for helping make this episode possible. And a huge thank you to you for listening. If you'd like to come hang out with us in Discord, well, you can find links in the descriptions of this episode to do so. And if you'd like to send me your story, you can do that at storiesaftermidnight.com. So, I appreciate you for being here. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed yourself, and we'll see you in the next one.